Welcome to the 4th Annual Guild of Music Supervisors Conference.
Good morning. So, we have no moderator, and Ludwig and I are both very natural speakers, so bear with us. So, we have 3 different sections to talk about. We were going to kind of talk a little bit about the backstory and what happened before. And then talk a little bit about the actual conceptualization of the score and songs. We're going to talk about both because it's very integrated on this movie, fully integrated on this movie. And then the third part, we're going to talk kind of about, I'd like to talk about where the rubber really hits the road and the actual execution of these things from a supervisor perspective. Because it's not all sunshines and rainbows. So the first part I thought, it's a little bit of an unusual process on this one in that Ludwig and the director Ryan Coogler had already made several movies together, or a few movies together. And I wonder if, Ludwig could talk a little bit about that.
Absolutely. So I'm the composer, and I wrote the music for Black Panther, and I actually met the yeah, and I met the wonderful director at USC about 2008, and he was a student here. Ryan Coogler was a student at the film school here, and I was a student in the film music composing department. And, I think one of the first things that my professors told me during my first class in school was you should try to work with as many student directors as possible because you never know who's going to be the next Spielberg. And I think I did like 30 or 40 student films. A lot of them were not that great, and my music was probably not that great either, but one of them really stood out, and that was a 5-minute short film by an Oakland guy named Ryan Coogler, an Oakland student, and that movie really stood out with other ones, and it was really incredible. This was 2008, and since then, since we worked together on that little short, we became really good friends, and I scored this other short, which was a 10-minute, 508, I think it's called. And then right after college, he did his first feature, which was Fruitvale Station, which later led on for him to direct and write Creed, which was another great movie. And so we worked on, for his whole career, I've been scoring all of his movies. So I think 3 years ago we were finishing Creed, and right after as we were finishing, Ryan was telling me about this other project that he was up and running for, which was Black Panther, and he was in meetings with Marvel at the time, and he was telling me about how excited he was, and we were already talking about the music, even though I don't think he was hired yet, but we started having discussions about music. And I think that's one of the key points in our collaboration and why we're able to really create something special for each movie is that we have such a special relationship. So whenever he gets started on a project, I'm already kind of on board before he's even hired on the movie, or before he even knows what he's gonna do. So he was, when we were at USC, he was talking to me that he wanted to do a boxing movie. One of the movies I want to do was gonna be a boxing movie, and At that time, he was doing a 3-minute student short. And yeah.
So one of the things we like to do at Marvel, with all of our talent, with our directors and composers, is we like to let the original voices come through. And so a big part of that is is creating a place for artists to interact with each other. So in the case of Ludwig and Ryan, they already had a long pre-existing relationship, and while Ludwig hadn't done a superhero movie, and kind of the process, and we'll talk about that a little later, it was really important. Part of my job as a supervisor was to create a space for them to operate into and go down different paths and different ideas that they were thinking about. So Ludwig and I met, we spoke about this, and I said, go do your thing, don't worry. I can, surround you with people in whatever area you might need them if you need them. And
which was very important for me as a composer, because I didn't really, Ryan was talking to me about, okay, I'm directing Black Panther, like I want you to score it, and I was always kind of like, oh shit, like it's a dream to score a superhero film for every composer, and I didn't really, I had to pinch myself, but I didn't really believe that I was gonna get the project. So for me to kind of sit down with Dave, who's the music supervisor on the project, was really kind of reassuring and kind of calmed me down and made me less nervous about the job.
And well, so to that end, one of the very first things that happened was over Christmas break 2016?
Yeah, 2 years, 2.5 years ago.
2016? I get an email, I don't know, second week of December, and it's Ludwig, and he's in Africa. And he needs money wired because he's got to pay some tribesmen that he's recording with. And so, true story. And I was like, okay, I guess he's gonna actually just do what he wants to do, and we'll figure this out.
So I read Ryan Coogler's script for Black Panther, and then we had a little conversation about what kind of music we're looking for, and I came to the conclusion that the only way I can do this movie any kind of justice is to go to Africa and really do my research and record with some incredible artists and musicians over there. So I went to Senegal for 3 weeks because I had a contact with an artist. His name is Baba Mal, and I went on tour with him at around 7 or 8 different towns and villages, and then I recorded just a bunch of musicians that I met during my travels there. So that was kind of the beginning of how the music for the score for the movie came together. I think something that we had talked about in an early conversation was just to have as an authentic African music sounding score as possible. And still a superhero movie, so it's still like cars exploding and like, big spaceships coming out of nowhere and like crazy stuff happening on the big screen. So you still need some kind of other power to really make it sound huge at moments, and that was why and how the challenge was how to infuse it with the African music with an orchestra to make it really sound like a big movie, with a big action superhero movie. And instead of having an orchestra supported by African music, I was turning it around. So I had African music supported by an orchestra, and that was for me the most challenging part of writing the score, how to find that combination and make it believable and authentic.
that's the organic nature of the way he recorded it and did it speaks to, well, it's why he should win an Oscar this year for that score. So the next part was we were in a very fortunate position in that Marvel had a certain reputation. Black Panther, I had artists coming at me for 2 years leading up to the movie, wanting to be involved. So it was a bit of the world was our oyster on this, and at the same time, when Ludwig officially got hired and Ryan officially got hired, we were very fortunate and blessed that Ludwig is also a record producer, and he does all the Childish Gambino records, which are some of the most acclaimed contemporary records, and he very much had Ryan's ear, and Ryan would speak through Ludwig in musical terms. So it gave us the ability to do something really special and have Ludwig very integrated into the song side of the picture. So when I sat with Ryan, we just started talking about, again, because we're at Marvel, I'm like, don't worry about budget, just tell me what you envision. And which is very unusual when you're a music supervisor, because it's always about the budget. At Marvel, because I knew people wanted to do it, I thought, well, I can kind of reach for the stars and see where we land on this. And the first name that came out of his mouth was Kendrick Lamar. All three of Kendrick's records, I didn't know this until we were actually in the meeting with Kendrick, were inspirations to him when he was writing Fruitvale Station, Creed, and then Panther. Kendrick's records had coincided with it, with those three movies. And so he had met him, but didn't know him. And he did know Kendrick's manager somewhat, or they had a lot of the same friends from Oakland. And so that was our starting point. So we were able to, our friends at Interscope were able to arrange a meeting, and we were able to get into the room with him, and Ludwig was there, and Kendrick, I think, was getting ready to go on tour, biggest artist in the world. I've been in many of these meetings where you don't really know how engaged they are in the conversation. And so he was there, and his manager, Dave Free, and Top Dog, who is his partner in his label, and Top Dog Entertainment, were in the room, and Ludwig and I and Ryan. I think that was it. And so Ryan started talking about the movie, and Kendrick didn't seem super engaged. I think he was just such a busy guy, and I'm sure every movie in Hollywood was coming at him. And then Ryan says, oh, and this is my musical counterpart, Ludwig Göransson, who works with Donald Glover and just did Redbone. And Kendrick was like, yo. And then Ryan was talking a little bit about it, and I think they assumed it was just another superhero movie at Marvel. And then Ryan says, oh, and I did a couple of movies. I did this movie, Fruitvale Station. And Kendrick was like, you did Fruitvale Station? Yo. And the meeting very quickly, the rest of us dissolved out of the room. It was them having a conversation, and meaning Ryan and Kendrick. That's how I remember it. And it was a very pure artist-to-artist conversation. And we all knew that let that breathe and let them really create a relationship while we were all sitting in the room with them. And we had a Comic-Con piece, which was very impressive at the time. We already had some great footage, including part of the car chase was in that footage. But the song that was in the Comic-Con piece was DNA by Kendrick. And it hadn't been released, so he hadn't seen it. And he saw that and he was like, yo, what's up? And and so that was kind of the beginning of it. The initial situation with Kendrick was he was hired to do one song. We wanted one song. We knew he was the busiest guy in the world. We wanted one song, and we wanted a song that worked for marketing materials and could be featured in the movie. And the original idea was the car chase. Trying to think, I want to go in order here.
I can fill
Go
in a little
ahead,
bit.
go ahead.
I think, this is mine and Ryan's third movie together, and I think something that really was a little bit different for us in terms of working with music and working on a score or a soundtrack on a movie was that no one really said no. Like I don't think we ever heard no like a single time in terms of what we were trying.
We'll get to that. There was a lot of no's later.
In terms of what we're trying to do, I was like, I'm going to go to Senegal for a month and I want to do this recording. And they was like, great. I expected like, oh, we don't know about this, but it was like, and Ryan was like, I want Kendrick to, do the soundtrack for this movie. And like everything just seemed to be kind of going our ways in terms of what we were trying to do, which was extremely compelling. And like Ryan and Kendrick's collaboration was just a match made in heaven. And then like they're just on the same kind of wavelength. I think Ryan was describing the movie for Kendrick for about 5 to 10 minutes, and Kendrick understood the whole movie after just a couple of minutes, and it was just so inspiring to see that collaboration and to be in that room was extremely special, and then also for me to be able to work with him and to be able to work with his producer Soundwave, which is that was also kind of a dream for me.
It was approached a little bit like an indie movie. It was what you do on indie movies when you have no money and you're begging an artist to do something for you. And in this case, we had money, but we didn't have Kendrick money. We didn't have Jay-Z money or Kanye money. But there was a belief that we had something special and we were trying to do something really special. So I want to come back to where we ended with the soundtrack, but why don't we talk about you delivering your first cues, and then maybe we'll watch the waterfall.
Oh yeah.
Kind of your first sitting in the room with, and let me preface this before you, Marvel's an unusual place in that there aren't 20 people giving notes. It's a very straightforward note-giving process. There's literally the director and the head of Marvel, and everybody else doesn't matter so much. Not that we don't add, but I would think from a creator standpoint, it's almost like an indie movie, just a $300 million indie movie. So,
yeah. And as a composer, my favorite, or what really stood out to me in the process of working with Marvel and with Dave was just, I don't know if it's a secret, but like just the way you review cues, which is every 2 weeks we had a score review session where we basically go through 20 minutes of music with Dave, the director, the producers, and we just look at the music and then we talk about the revision or the score or approve the cues, which is extremely important, and especially when you work on a movie that's this scope and 2.5 hours long, and kind of get your cues approved early on and get comments from everyone in the same room. That's really helpful. So this was one of the most everything was very challenging, but this is really fun. But this was a very challenging cue to write because this is the first waterfall fight, and it's between M'Baku and T'Challa, and they're fighting for the throne, and M'Baku is challenging T'Challa for the throne.
And it's also interesting because this was written before it was shot. Ludwig and Ryan had decided early on that there would be no temp in the movie. So most of the score was sketched out in some form by the time we saw the director's cut of the movie, which is usually 10 weeks after the movie's shot. So you were on set that day in Atlanta, right, for this?
I was on set in Atlanta. It was freezing cold, and I had to shoot this waterfalls fight scene in like water, and it
With
was like
loincloths, yeah.
it was so cold. And one of the really cool things that we were able to do with this scene in particular was just because me and Ryan already had a theme for the movie, so we were able to have the crowd kind of chant and get into like chanting T'Challa's name in a rhythmical phrase that would fit into the main theme of the movie, which when we get to see that, it's very effective. And this is also a good example on how I was able to blend in the African percussion and instruments together with the orchestra to give it that extra dynamic power.
So while all this was going on, we were waiting patiently for our Kendrick song. And Kendrick was on tour. And the label kept saying, we think it's coming, and managers were kind of, there wasn't a lot of interaction going on. We had the deal figured out, which was very complicated for a number of reasons, which there's a whole panel for how difficult the deal was to make. And, but we started to hear rumors that he might be doing more than one song. And of course, we were extremely excited about the prospect of that happening. But more time went by. Meanwhile, the trailers are getting cut, and in order to get the maximum effect from the song and for the amount of money that we were going to spend for this song, it really needed to be in the trailers. Marketing needed to help chip in to pay for this kind of pool of money to pay for what we were trying to do. And kept going, and then we heard he might be doing 3 songs. And of course, as a supervisor, I'm like, this is great. I can't pay for 3 songs. Nobody could pay for 3 Kendrick Lamar songs. And this kept happening. We started to freak out a little bit. Disney marketing definitely was freaking out because they were like, where's our song? And we had a little more time on the film. And then Kendrick, I left out an important step, which was incredible. Kendrick's manager and Top Dog were gonna come over and watch some footage. They hadn't actually seen any footage outside of the Comic-Con piece. And so they were coming over, and Ryan and I were meeting with them, and his manager shows up, and he says, we're like, where's Top Dog? And he's like, oh, Top Dog can't make it. We're like, okay, we'll show his manager the footage. He's like, oh, no, Kendrick's coming. And we're like, Kendrick's coming. And they rushed upstairs, and they got the post-production intern to move their car so Kendrick could park. And then it was great. So Kendrick shows up, and Kendrick is such a humble, unassuming guy. He's just a really beautiful person. And Ryan just started, before we started to show him footage, he started walking him through editorial. And they've got all the post-production and all the visual effects. I mean, there's, 40 people on the floor. And he was just walking by, and he was stopping each of the rooms, the editorial staff, And he's like, oh, hey. And they're like, oh, hey, Ryan. He's like, oh, hey, I just wanted you to meet Kendrick. And they're like, and he did that all across the floor, and it was great. So Kendrick came in, we showed him some footage, and we had figured out exactly the sequences we wanted to show him, which were like the song sequences, or the place we thought his songs could work. And as part of that process, we were having so much fun, we ended up ordering lunch, and I think Kendrick was with us for a couple of hours, which, again, you have to put a little bit in context of biggest artist in the world. He'd come back from touring, I think, the day before, and was so generous with his time. It was pretty extraordinary. So fast forward to where's our song, where's our song, where's our song? And Ryan calls me and says, Kendrick wants us to come over to the studio. And we go over to the studio, and it's an unassuming building on the west side. Not hip-hoppy at all, if you guys know what I'm talking about. There's not a bunch of guys kind of hanging around and doing the thing. It's Kendrick and his producer Soundwave and his manager, and they proceed to play us 14 tracks, and half of them already have. Khalid was already on, and I mean, it just like it's kind of crazy, and.
And they had taken also bits and pieces and samples from like parts of the score to
right. Ludwig had given him a bunch of the drums and the stuff, so there was that whole interaction happening. Yeah, it was incredible, and the conversation was very much. I have some of the artists. Vince Staples was on already. Top artists. Who else do we want? And Ryan talked a lot about. Two touchstones, it seemed like to me. He talked about the continent, and he wanted it to be authentic to the continent, to the African continent. And the other was, because the movie starts and ends in Oakland, he wanted to integrate Oakland, which was his foundation, which he's done in all of his movies. And so what's so extraordinary about the process, for so many of the artists on the record, Kendrick made the calls. He literally called or emailed artists in South Africa. We're like, hey, you want to jump on this track? And they're like, this is bullshit, right? Like, and so that's so much of how we started to hang the meat on the bone of those. But Kendrick actually wrote, and Soundwave, and Ludwig wrote every single one of those tracks. It was very unusual.
I didn't write every single one.
Well, no, but I mean, what I mean is it wasn't, hey, let's get Eugen Blackrock and she's just going to deliver a track. It was very consciously wanted to be fully integrated. Kendrick had decided that he wanted it to be fully integrated. And the other thing that we had talked about when we showed him footage was I said to him that as a Marvel, I had always wanted to do a song that had a good guy and a bad guy on the record. It would have two competing rappers or singers. One would be the villain, one would be the hero. And when Kendrick delivered the initial framework for the record, and it was more than framework, but half the record was done in the voice of Killmonger, and the other half of the record was done in the voice of T'Challa, with various people on I mean, it's extraordinary if you think about it. So he took that idea to a whole another level. One of the things that was interesting, let's talk about the car chase thing, yeah?
Yeah, so in the middle of the movie, there's a car chase in Busan in Korea. They're at a casino and they're chasing this villain called Claw. And he runs off in a car, and that's the beginning of this huge 5-6 minute car chase. And something early on that I think Ryan wanted was he wants a song there. And since Kendrick is doing the soundtrack, like, let's have a Kendrick Lamar song in there. And I think for that specific scene, it's a 6 minute scene, so you can't really just put in any song in there and it's gonna work, because there's so many turns, there's so many twists, there's so many story lines and story plots in the whole fight. So you kind of need to custom made the track into a score song. So I got in with Kendrick and Soundwave. Soundwave came by my studio, and we looked at the scene together, and we're like, okay, let's make a fast, high energy type of track for this. And we did a beat. Someone went back to the studio to see Kendrick, and I think a week later, I heard the beat, and he had Kendrick Lamar, Vince Staples, and
Eugen Blackrock.
Eugen Blackrock, yeah. And it was great. The track was, this is a great track. And they gave me the acapellas, and they gave me the stems for the whole project. And then I had all the really fun work to do, trying to get this into the movie, and like speeding things up a couple of BPMs to get it faster. Changing the beat from time to time to really make there's so many car stops, there's so many spear throwings, you need the T'Challa theme in there sometimes, you need the female warriors theme in there sometimes, the Dora Milaje theme, which is this high African yell, the whoop. And it was really a tough, very tough scene to score.
There were many revisions of this. Plus, there was a temp piece that we had in there for so long that there was a lot of love for that. But it was, it never happens, temps, it's always. But there was, one of the things that is so interesting, again, about this and about the work that Ludwig was done, is that with Kendrick, we had an artist that was flexible. Most artists at that level, 9 out of 10, if it was, I'm not slagging Kanye, but if it was Kanye, there would have been no change to the song. It would have been what it is. And here you go, here's my art, and that's the end of it. Whereas with Kendrick, there was an enormous amount of flexibility. No one was gonna compromise the art. It just wasn't gonna happen. But there was so much flexibility, and there was so much processing to get ultimately what we got. Marvel doesn't put songs in movies unless it works. We don't just put songs in because we spent a ton of money for them. We'd rather spend a ton of money and not hurt the movie. So there was no foregone conclusion that no matter what was delivered to us, that was going to end up in that sequence. So it speaks a lot about the process that we went through and that Ludwig went through in Soundwave, and so it's pretty awesome. One thing I would say to this is for the supervisors, people pursuing the supervision career that are supervising. This is the non-sunshine and rainbows part and unicorns. The record, the final music in the film wasn't picked till very late, in large part because a lot of it was African artists. And anything outside, if you've done clearance, you'll know that anything outside the US can take time. And anything in Africa takes double that time. So even South Africa, they make the French look fast. If you've dealt with the French or the Japanese music industries. Also, this record was delivered, we had untold numbers of producers on each track. We had samples, we had side artists, we had writers from all over the place, while Kendrick Soundwave had written maybe the hooks or the underlying tracks. There was all types of pieces in the gumbo. And this record we started to really get a handle on what was in this record about 5 weeks before Christmas. The legal team that we have at Marvel, there's many people involved in these processes. we had to do, and a huge shout out to Christine Berggren, who is a goddess. And hip hop is very difficult no matter who's involved. I think we did 135 separate deals for the soundtrack. And we went through, clearance-wise, I think we went through probably 5 times in clearances for the actual film, what ended up in the film. Because we'd get it all cleared, and then there'd be some guy in Oakland who, would show up and try to shake us down and stuff. So there was a lot of, it was a very horrible Christmas that year. I mean, it was truly awful, but we all knew in our hearts that what was happening with this film and with this artist specifically was very special. And so everybody just kind of said, the part where we talk about nobody said no, yeah, they did. They said no. As soon as we got the record, there was a big giant no. Not from Marvel. Marvel was like, oh, Dave will figure it out. He always just figures it out. But from the record labels, from Disney, because it was just too complicated. It just couldn't get done. There were too many issues. We also had an artist like Kendrick who speaks the truth, and some of that is a bit rough. And so there was a lot of people just saying no. And I think one of the messages that I'd like to say to people who are supervisors is just push through. If you've got we were blessed that we had such an amazing director, and Marvel's an amazing company, and Ludwig's an amazing, that we just said, you know what, we're just gonna do this. And everybody's like, well, you can't. And it's like, yeah, we will. And we're just gonna do this. So it was a pretty extraordinary process. Anything else you want to add? I think we're kind of we can do Q&A. Or
I think just the last thing to add to just why this happened in the first place is, and also for us on the music side, is it's not every day that you get the opportunity to work with a director like Ryan Coogler, who is so invested in every section of the movie, and the way how invested he is in the music is it's incredible to me, because I know he's like at Disney in the post-production. He was at Disney from 7 a.m. to 11 at night, and then at midnight he came by my studio, and we're sitting with me. He was sitting on the couch listening to my cues till 5 a.m. And he would go on to do that every day the whole post-production process. And we were scoring in London with the orchestra, and he couldn't be there because he had to be in the editing bay, but he was still up, nights in LA talking over me over Skype, listening to the music being recorded, being involved in every little detail of the music and having specific notes, and being able to communicate in a musical language and in a universal language about exactly what he's looking for and what is that he wants. And I think also how he was able to bring that over to talking with Kendrick and making this incredible
The Weeknd.
Yeah,
The Weeknd was an interesting meeting in that you were in that meeting too, right? Yeah, he was talking to The Weeknd, and I had seen The Weeknd had a Black Panther hat on in a Instagram. I think JoJo had sent it to me on an Instagram picture, and I was like, okay. And eventually he came in, but what was so interesting about that meeting was Ryan knew that he was of Ethiopian ethnicity, and I guess Ryan knew quite a bit about Ethiopian culture from his friends in Oakland, I think, and again, they were having a whole different conversation than your typical thing. And he asked Weeknd or Abel, he said, have you ever thought about singing in Ethiopian? And he says, well, I actually do at the beginning of The Hills. And so he started playing the Hills tune. He said, here in the background, that's me singing. So on the track, so Ryan said, would you do something like that for us on our record? And he did. He actually had Abel had his mother write the lyrics, and then he sang them. So if you listen to the back of the track, that's what you can hear in the background is an Ethiopian, which is just so rad. So rad.
And I think one of the last days when working on this movie, I called Ryan at like 11 at night, and he was like, I was like, where are you? He was like, I'm in the studio mixing with The Weeknd, mixing his song, like being, I was like, why, how do you have time? Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. So that's it, guys.